Hey y'all, my name is Slowrise, and if you're watching this video, then you probably signed up to get some royalty-free MIDI stems. They also call these trackouts, but you could say it either way. Also, if you're watching this video, you might not know how to import MIDI files into your DAW, and that's something I'll show you in a minute. If you're randomly watching this video, then shout out to you on finding it. If you didn't know I was sending out MIDI stems and you want to be a part of it, just click the link in the description to sign up. So let's get into it. I'll be covering steps on how to import these stems into Ableton, Logic, and Pro Tools. A lot of people were wondering, why am I sending out MIDI stems? Well, in my opinion, MIDI stems are the most flexible. You can use your own sounds with these MIDI stems. Everybody has their go-to sounds that they like to use, and sometimes you just want to use them with maybe a different melody or a different progression. Also, you can modify these MIDI notes to create new melodies. You can change the rhythm, the tempo, you could chop them in half, you could do whatever you want. And also, you might be learning how to play the keys, and this will kind of give you a head start. You could figure out note placement. You could see what chords work together, what notes work together. You could kind of go from there after that. So that's why MIDI is kind of forever in a sense. Once you get these MIDI files, you can continue to reuse them in other tracks. As long as you alter them, as long as you flip them, they're always going to sound new. And as long as you put your own sounds on them, they never get old. Let's get back into it. If you've already downloaded the file from the internet, then you should be looking at a zip file. Once you unzip that file, you get another folder. Within that folder, two other folders titled MIDI and Waves. The first one, MIDI, will of course hold all your MIDI stems, and they'll be labeled by the tempo along with the key. Underneath that, you'll get the Waves folder, which kind of has a sample of the MIDI file, which you could audition before you load that into your DAW. Let's take a listen. So again, they're labeled the same, tempo followed by key. All you got to do is match up the names and then drag that into your DAW. If you want to use these waves directly in your track, that's fine too. Like I said, everything's royalty free. Feel free to flip them, chop them up, and reuse them. Let's go ahead and import a MIDI clip into an Ableton Live session. So I'll go ahead and open up a session now. Now there are a few ways to import. The easiest way and the most consistent way across most DAWs is to just click and drag the clip. And what should happen is a new MIDI track is created and the clip shows up inside that MIDI track. So let's go ahead and do that with the first MIDI clip. I'm going to drag this into Ableton's clip view, and we see that a new MIDI track is created. Our clip shows up as well, and it's titled Slow Stems S1 E1. Tempo is 85 and the key is C minor. The next thing that you'd want to do is actually assign a sound to that MIDI track so we can hear what everything sounds like. So I'm going to go over to my sound bank and I'll just select dance.org and let's take a listen. That continues on. If you didn't notice already, the tempo of the session is at a much faster tempo than the original, but the MIDI clip will change to that tempo. Obviously, you could change it down to 85 if you want. Play it. Much slower, but you know, there are no rules, so let's turn it back to 111 and we'll work off of that. The next piece of information that you can modify are the MIDI notes. So if you click the clip itself, it opens up another window. I'm going to go ahead and expand this so we can have a better view. And down at the bottom, you can see your MIDI notes. Underneath that, you'll have some more information being your velocity, and we'll go over that in just a second. But let's start out by let's say removing the bottom notes of this progression And then we'll remove the top line of the next part. And let's play it to hear what it sounds like. And so on. So one thing we noticed by removing the bass line, it creates a different sound. The chords are more open. Let's say you already have a bass line in your current track and you're trying to free up some space. You could go ahead and remove those bottom notes. In the next part, again, the melody, by removing the top line, the melody is removed. So if you have a lead playing at the top and you just need more space, you could do the same thing. The next piece of information that will change up is the velocity, and that's down below. Now, when you modify velocity, you're modifying a few things, that being the volume or the loudness of your sound. You're modifying the attack and everything surrounding that, and you're also changing up the note consistency. And what I mean by that is, if you look at this area here, you could see these dots are in all different places, and those represent the notes. You know what I mean? In this case, with them being all over the place, it kind of gives more feel to the track, but some people might want, a consistent sound going across the progression. So what I'll do, I'll select all the notes here, and then I'll go ahead and bump these up to max velocity, and I'll hit play. So automatically you could hear that everything got louder. You're hearing now more clickiness going on with the sounds. And then you're also hearing all the notes hitting at the same velocity, which creates a consistent sound, and that's something some people want. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to play it, and while it plays, I'm going to sweep through the values of the velocity so we can kind of hear the differences. So. So by sweeping through, you could hear that when the value started getting lower, everything became softer. There was less clicks going on. When we reached higher values, you could hear the clicks coming back in, and I ended at a sweet spot of 80 about, that you can see right here. And that, gives me enough clicks where it doesn't get annoying, but at the same time, it has a consistent level. So, you can set it to whatever you like, whatever is best for your track. Everything's to taste. Now, the next piece of information that we'll modify is something that's common, especially in my MIDI clips, is the sustain pedal or the hold pedal. They go by different names, but to access that, you would just hit this third little button here, and that opens up a new window or a new pane, and it's called envelopes. So you select the first box, it's already assigned to MIDI control. Underneath that, you get the option to choose information related to your hold pedal. So once I click hold pedal, it shows me all the values. Now, just a brief background on MIDI information. So MIDI messages are stored in channels, and MIDI holds about 128 channels. Within those channels, or each channel, are 128 values. So in this case, by selecting the 64th channel, which is hold pedal, that's kind of consistent across all DAWs, across all MIDI. It's really standard. You have hold pedal at 64. Now within that, you'll get another 128 values, ranging from 0 down here all the way to about 127. And then you could modify these to whatever you want it. In the case of sustain, there's only two options really. on and off. If you use a sustain pedal, you either press it down or you let it go, and that affects the sound itself. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and select everything and delete it so we could get a better example. Right now, my line's at the bottom, set at 0. I'm going to raise it to 1. Now, what I found is that the first half, or all the values between 0 and 63, are the off position. So no notes will be held over, and there's no sustain going on. Then everything after that, from about 64 to 127, relates to the on position. So imagine yourself pressing down on the sustain pedal. It'll hold the notes. So I'll play the clip and then I'll just sweep through so we can get an example. So at 2, none of the notes are being held. I could do this up until about 63. So the moment we go over 63 to 64, you'll hear the difference. So and then I'll raise it to 127. So everything is held at that point. So you can set it to whatever you like. If you have your own sustain pedal, then feel free to draw in your own automation, or you could go back to the original settings. Seen here. Now we'll take a look at another thing, and I'll go ahead and play it. Is that in between each section, you kind of see these gaps. Now, what the gaps represent is, these kind of reset periods. That's probably the best way I could put it. If you're familiar with the sustain pedal, if you hold it down and you play a progression or notes or whatever, you'll start to hear the notes running into one another. Things start to become muddy and less clear. You won't be able to hear the differences. But with these reset points, it kind of gives each note its own sustain section and then resets after the next one. So that way the notes become clearer, they don't run into each other, and it basically sounds more natural. So just to recap, we can see that the most common values to modify off of these MIDI clips is the tempo, the MIDI notes, the velocity, and in my case, the hold or sustain pedal information. Also, on top of that, we see that by changing up the MIDI information, this will affect the sound or the properties of the sound. And it kind of works the other way too. When you start to change the settings of the sound, it might affect the MIDI in a different way. So, the more you learn about both sides, the more control you'll have over your sounds, and the more you'll be able to kind of fine tune a sound to your track. So keep practicing. What we'll do is import a clip into Logic. A lot of the concepts will be the same. The only difference is the way we modify the information, and obviously the views that we see when modifying that information. So I'll go ahead and open up a new Logic session. And within this Logic session, we already have a MIDI track and we have a sound waiting for the new MIDI clip. So again, I'll click and drag one of our MIDI clips from the folder directly onto the track. A message box appears and it just asks us if we want to import the tempo information. In most cases, you'll be hitting no because you'll already be working on a track and you don't want to change that. In other cases, let's say if you're starting off with the MIDI clip first, you might want to import the tempo and just work off of that. In this case, I'm hitting no, and we'll just work off the current tempo. And I'll expand this. So the first thing we see the MIDI clip. Again, slow stems S1, E3, the tempo is 144, or the original tempo is 144, and the key is in C minor. We can see here that we're working in a tempo of 120, so that doesn't matter. If I hit play, we'll hear what it sounds like. So just like the last time, one of the first things we can, modify is the tempo. If I wanted to speed this up, I'll turn it to 132 and we'll hit play. Again, much faster. I'll go ahead and put that back at 120. The next piece of information that we can modify is the MIDI notes themselves. And now if I double click this clip, a new window opens up at the bottom and it's known as the piano roll, and it'll show me the MIDI notes here. Now instead of deleting notes, adding notes, changing it, we'll focus on quantizing. Now in some cases we want a nice quantize to make everything consistent. It sounds cleaner. So if I select all the notes, and with Logic everything's right here, everything's actually more in your face. We're going to quantize it to a 16th note at a strength of 100, and by hitting the Q, we just quantize the notes. Let's take a listen. So that's pretty clean. So we'll leave it like that. And that's just one of the ways you could modify, MIDI clips. So the next thing we'll take a look at is velocity. Now we see velocity here, but what you want to actually do is bring up the window like we had seen in Ableton. It'll bring up, by hitting this button, it'll bring up the controller section, and then you could choose note velocity here. So again, each dot represents the note, and you kind of see the values according to this graph. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those notes, and I'll bump those to the max. And let's hit play. So by raising up the velocity, I don't know, the way to explain it, everything became more serious. The notes were held, everything, got louder, the attack changed. And I'll go ahead and sweep through so we can see, more examples. So sorry for that extra note that you heard, but when you click and drag that to different areas on the velocity scale, you kind of hear the difference. Things become softer when you go to a lower value. When you raise them back up, things get louder and more serious. So on top of that, another piece of information that we'll modify is the sustain or the hold pedal. Now if I go back to this controller here, I'll modify, where is it? Sustain pedal. So again, the values go from 0 to 127. Anything above 63 means, the sustain is on. Anything lower from 63 and below means the sustain is off. And again, in the middle, you see these reset points that, allow for a cleaner, more natural sound. So feel free to modify those however you want. I won't go over them again, but you know the concept at this point. Just keep practicing. The best way that we'll be importing a MIDI clip into a DAW is through Pro Tools. And honestly, if you made it this far, then I'm proud of you. The concepts will be the same. The only differences will be in the views that you see and the ways to access the different parts of information. So let's get into that. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new Pro Tools session. Again, the easiest way to bring in any MIDI clip is to click and drag, and everything else should flow from there. I'm going to go ahead and drag this one in. And a new message window pops up asking me how I'd like to import. So we're going to open up a new track, and in this case, an instrument track. and we're not going to import tempo from the MIDI file, and it's going to be at the session start. So once I hit OK, the clip shows up, a new track is created. Now with Pro Tools, you just want to make sure you're able to see all the options you need to select the sound into that track. In this case, I have my instrument selected and my inserts, so I could select the plugin. I'll go over to the inserts, I'll select multi-channel plugin, go down to instruments, and I'll select the Electric 88. Now while that's loading, I'll expand this window so we can have a better view. Once that's done, I'm going to hit play and we're going to hear what it sounds like. So again, one of the first things that you can modify is the tempo. In this case, we're going to leave it at 120. If you sped it up, then the MIDI clip would follow that. The other thing that we had modified would be the MIDI notes themselves. And if we double click the clip here, it opens up our MIDI editor window. With Ableton, we had subtracted notes to get a different sound going. With Logic, we had chose to quantize it to get a more consistent feel. In Pro Tools, we're going to go ahead and change the key. So if I select all the notes and just press the up or arrow a few times, we can easily change the key. Now this could be whatever key that your track is in. And by hitting play button, so we already hear the difference in key. So if I were to go back to the main window, we're in a new key, we're in the right tempo. The next thing that we'll modify is the velocity. So within the track, there is a button for a drop down, which shows the automation lanes. So if I were to select all the notes here and drag those all the way up, let's hear what it sounds like. So already it just sounds like I'm smashing keys. And in some cases, you don't want to raise the volume all the way to the top. But again, there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. In this case, I'm going to return it back to its original settings. And if you listen to it, everything's more clear. Everything has more feeling. It just sounds better overall. Now, another thing that we can modify is, again, the sustain information. And you'll see that we have our sections here, which corresponds to the notes. We have our rest areas, so nothing sounds muddy. If I were to just delete all these, the MIDI information is not active. If I return it, now everything sounds more natural. So we just went over the 4 most common ways to modify your MIDI file in all the DAWs, that being your sustain, your tempo, your MIDI note length, and your velocity. Of course, this should be the same across all DAWs, anything from the click and drag to the way we modify it. The differences will be the way to access them and the way they show up in your DAW. But continue to practice these, continue to understand both sides of sound creation, being the MIDI and the sound settings, and understand how they affect one another. If you like this video, my name is Slow Rise, and if you haven't already signed up to receive these royalty-free MIDI stems, go ahead and click the link in the description, and you'll get those as soon as I send them out. But other than that, I'm out.